forested. If you don't help us, we'll kill you. That word is banned. Bonobos are our nearest relative. Phil, Leah, Streetfield Wood, Streetfield Wood. Phil, Leah, Streetfield Wood, Streetfield Wood. We have to keep together. Do you think we're doomed to behave like people before us did? If you don't help us, we'll kill you. That word is banned. Bonobos are our nearest relative. Phil, Leah, Streetfield Wood, Streetfield Wood. Phil, Leah, Streetfield Wood, Streetfield Wood, Streetfield Wood.
Hello everybody and welcome to today's video, key quotations for the Dennis Kelly play DNA, and they've been set to music, thank you to Mrs. Bruff who sang them, and let's go through the key quotations. If you don't help us, we'll kill you. This is Phil's threat to Brian in Act 2, Scene 3, and it's one of the many possible choices which relate to Phil, Brian, leadership and setting. In terms of leadership, it's an example of how Phil controls those in the group. Phil controls Brian through threats of violence. Brian appears to be the weakest member of the group, seen through the fact that he was the one chosen to go to the head teacher in tears, and the suggestion is that he was the most likely to be believed. Now, Phil knows the best way to control Brian is through threats, and this contrasts with John Tate, whose threats of violence towards Richard in Act 1 were ineffectual, where Richard simply responded with, "You shouldn't threaten me, John." And so part of Phil's leadership and power comes through knowing how to control others effectively. Silence with Leah, threats with Brian, direction with others. Now, Streetfield Wood are three different settings that are repeated in the play. Each part of the play begins in the street, moving to the field, and then in Acts 1 to 3, the wood and the field again. And the way this pattern of settings is always the same highlights their significance. So what do these settings symbolise? Well, one idea is that the character's behaviour becomes less and less civilised the further they are away from society. The street, supposedly surrounded by houses or shops, roads, cars, people, in other words, civilization, sees a more civilized way of behaving. The field, supposedly isolated, and finally the woods, isolated and undercover, see more and more uncivilized behavior unfold. This threat of murder that we have in this first quotation takes place in the woods. These settings could symbolise the layers of the human psyche, from the conscious, the street, to the subconscious, the field, and the primal, the wood, mirroring the character's descent into more instinctual, less socially constrained behaviour as the scenes progress. That word is banned is an Act 1 Scene 3 quotation from John Tate, the early leader in the play, and it's a good quotation for writing about leadership. Initially, John Tate appears to be the leader of the group, exercising control through threats of physical violence, explaining that the word dead is banned, and if anyone says it, I'm going to have to, quote, bite their face, talking to Lou and Danny there. And this seems to be an effective way to lead Lou and Danny, as the stage directions inform us they say nothing, but it's not an approach which will work with everyone. As I already said earlier, things begin to crumble when Richard, Kathy and Brian arrive. Tate extends the same threat to the new arrivals, but Richard is not intimidated by these threats of violence. "You shouldn't threaten me, John," he says. There follows a brief power struggle between Richard and Tate before Phil slowly emerges as the leader. So this quotation is a good one for exploring how leadership develops across the play. Bonobos are our nearest relative is a quotation from Leah in Act 1 Scene 4. It links to the theme of evolution in the play. In 1859, Charles Darwin published his work On the Origin of Species, in which he detailed his theory of biological evolution. In The Descent of Man, 1871, Darwin suggested that apes and humans may have a common ancestor. The question raised here is, if people have evolved from animals, is it possible to devolve back into an animalistic state? Is there always an animal within us? And Kelly taps into this idea in DNA with the animal imagery and references, including Leah's monologue about bonobos and chimps in this scene. In the same speech, Leah references DNA, which is of course the play's title. The topic of DNA also highlights how Kelly explores the savagery within humanity. DNA is the building material of humans and most living organisms, and in one way DNA plays a part in the text because of how it's planted on the postman and is used in the criminal investigation, but there is a second significance to the title in what has often been called the nature-nurture debate. Kelly's play questions whether people act the way they do because they learn that behaviour from others, or whether they do it because it's programmed into their DNA, again from their animal ancestry. We Have to Keep Together is John Tate in Act 1, Scene 3. The play's exploration of the importance of the group over the individual is summed up nicely in this quotation. Do you think we're doomed to behave like people before us did is Leah in Act 2, Scene 4. It's a great quotation linking to the significance of the title. The idea that people behave in the same way time and time again across history seems to be reinforced through the use of structure. As I've already said, each part of the play begins in the street, moving to the field, and then in Acts 1 to 3 anyway, the wood and the field again. So the settings are cyclical, and so, Leah's question suggests, is human behaviour. There's a sense that Leah understands the savagery in the play is the same savagery that's taken place all throughout human history because it's embedded into human DNA. Phil, that's Leah in Act 2, Scene 2. Leah, that's Phil in Act 3, Scene 4. Now these quotations show the development of Leah as a character and also the shifts in Phil. Leah's Phil in Act 2, Scene 2 is evidence that Phil has power over Leah, exerted through a silence which keeps her clamouring for his attention, and Phil's Leah in Act 3, Scene 4 indicates the change in Leah, who leaves Phil, but also in Phil, who calls after her for the first time. So far in the play, every scene in the field has seen Leah talking and Phil either completely or mostly ignoring her, and ending this scene with the complete opposite heightens the impact. For once, Phil isn't in control. By the play's final scene, Phil is no longer leader of the group. So I hope you find those quotations useful and that you can memorise them through the music. If you found this video helpful, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel.